How well does your current IT situation reflect your business requirements? Are you able to accelerate innovation? Can you optimize customer experience and pave the way to data based business models? Can you reliably support continuous business critical processes? What about your carbon footprint? Well, future cloud infrastructure tackles these cloud challenges. Companies that still rely on on premise IT from their own data centers will play an evolutionary alternative in the private cloud that raises the possibilities of IT to a new level. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Diyalani. Well, the cloud, as we know, is the way forward and the way to go. But recent reports show that many cloud users struggle with budget overruns, security and compliance issues, and reliability, besides the challenge to manage their multi cloud landscapes. On the other hand, there are still on premises workloads that create huge carbon footprint and bear technical debt that hinders digitalization and innovation. Let's welcome Terry Maiolo, Vice President and General Manager, Asia Pacific at OVHcloud, to discuss sustainability and the future of responsible cloud infrastructure. Hi, Terry, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Priya. Thanks for giving us the time and the opportunity to have a chat to you. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise, Terry, it's a pleasure to have you on our podcast today. And of course, we are going to have a very insightful conversation because cloud have been in talks about the advantages, the challenges, what does the future look like. So I think our audience are going to gain some interesting insights from your end. So, without wasting further time, let's get started and let's set the foundation by telling our listeners more about OVH Cloud, its specialization, and alongside that, a little bit more about you, Terry. How has your journey been till date, and what exactly are you looking after at OVH Cloud?
Thanks, Priya. Yeah, look, allow me to give you some insights about OVH Cloud. We are a pure cloud player. We have a global presence with 46 data centers around the world in 4 continents. We also have another 30 what we call local zones, which are a smaller presence in some other newer market. Of more interest, I guess, to our listeners are what we have here in APAC from a data center perspective. We have a data center in Mumbai, along with two in Singapore and three in Sydney, is our presence here in APAC, and which is the territory that I oversee. So all of Asia Pacific, obviously with a special interest in those countries where we have our data centres. Your question in here about maybe what makes OVH different is probably the best things for me to speak to, and probably the most significant one is that we are a European hosting provider. And cloud provider. So we are held to GDPR and the European compliance around sovereignty, etc. A lot of the other larger hyperscalers, etc., are a little bit more attached to the Cloud and Patriot Act, which dominated by America, and another act which influences organisations based in China. So that's one of the significant points of difference, and the other one is how we deploy our infrastructure in our data centres. We use a unique water cooling direct to the chip. It's an innovation that we develop and have been doing at scale for over 20 years. And what this enables us to do, or why I mention this, and it'll become certainly apparent as we work through our conversation, is that because we call our servers direct to the chip, we in fact do not have air conditioning in these water-cooled data centres. So therefore, the air doesn't escape, or the hot air doesn't escape into the room, having a requirement to actually cool the entire room. We get a lot of our cooling done direct at the source. at the GPU or CPU that's generating that heat, along with some other components. And on that point of sovereignty and sustainability, because this element is both. We actually are the only large-scale provider that builds its own servers, and we do that through two factories, one in France and one in Canada. So we have people, and interestingly, it's kind of cool to see some robot build these servers. The construction of our servers means that nobody else touches those servers. It does actually add an additional layer of security and sovereignty. But then the sustainability element comes in the way that we rack and deploy those services or servers in their racks out to our data centers around the world. And then what happens with those servers once they reach the end of their first life cycle? We give our servers and the components within them a second and sometimes a third life, and also any parts that can't be given a second life, we actually recycle them, and so that we achieved zero waste this year. Which is the other point that is significantly unique.
Great, Terry. Thank you for that fantastic overview about OVHcloud and also about your role. It's really fascinating to learn and understand not only about the organization's expertise and strategic focus, but also about the leadership perspective behind its growth and success. Great. With that context set in place, now the rising importance of cloud services and even cloud service providers has caught the attention of policymakers and regulators seeking to reap the benefits of this new technology while managing the risks. Now, the regulatory landscape of cloud computing is highly complex, owing to factors such as rapid increasing centrality to many societal and economic functions and continuous innovations in this involved technology. Understanding the many issues emerging from this context will be critical to responsibly unlocking the potential of cloud services for the overall society. So, according to you, Terry, how are macroeconomic pressures and these evolving regulations influencing how enterprises think about their cloud dependencies?
A great question, Priya, and it's certainly something that's very pertinent at the moment. I think there's a push coming from governments themselves that have maybe looked further down the road. In India, you have the Data Personal and Data Protection Act, which is putting in place some regulatory and some challenges to organisations to think clearly about the lawful processing of personal data, but also where that data is stored. To avoid extraterritorial threats. And so it's being imposed by governments, including the Indian government. But then also there's a different geopolitical context at the moment. With the way people are sharing their data, their information in this ether, in the cloud and online, etc. The organisations that have that data, and then most importantly, the organisations that host that data, such as all of the cloud providers need to be very responsible in their approach. And the current geopolitical context has actually led to a significant interest in European cloud providers, ones that are held by GDPR and aren't subject to the both the Cloud and Patriot Act, which if you have any parts of your infrastructure operation or are an American company as such, you are obligated by those acts globally, irrespective of what you do or who you deal with. So, and that is a changed or, certainly evolving geopolitical context. And there has been significant interest from organisations themselves, from the customers directly themselves, not just governments taking up the responsibility of making these organisations more responsible, but it has put this conversation into an area which needs to be dealt with more critically, or that is certainly the what we are getting from the customers, the opportunities and the organisations that we are certainly talking to every day.
Very well said, Terry. And I think it's interesting to see how cloud strategy is no longer just an IT decision, but a broader business and a financial consideration. And I think it's important that enterprises and organizations today, they need to think more strategically about their data sovereignty, resilience, and long-term flexibility. And the conversation has clearly shifted from simply moving to the cloud to ensuring that cloud investments continue to deliver measurable business value while meeting the evolving governance requirements. Great. Moving ahead, now over the years, conversations around cloud adoption were largely centered on scalability, speed, or cost efficiency. But now the narrative seems to be evolving far beyond just the technical capability. Enterprises today are operating in an environment where ESG commitments, energy consumption, data governance, and long term digital responsibility are becoming critical boardroom discussions. So they are no longer asking whether infrastructure can scale. They are asking how responsibly that infrastructure is being built as well as managed. So, do you believe enterprises are now evaluating cloud providers also not just on scale and performance, but also on sustainability, transparency, and long term infrastructure responsibility?
The simple answer to that question is yes, and it's you've put it in an interesting context by mentioning the boardroom, and that is it's look part of the conversation that has never left has been performance and security. So that's and the other one being the cost that's associated to these things. That's always been part of the conversation, but yes, added to that has been the sovereignty and then also the sustainability element. What is interesting is that sometimes there is a belief that in order to be sovereign and in order to be sustainable, particularly that sustainable element, that I'm probably going to have to compromise performance or certainly compromise cost. And, look, let's face it, there is a lot of discussion that happens in the boardroom, but the CEOs, probably the constant pressure is always going to be there about their fiscal responsibility and, being very responsible with where and how they spend their money and having control over that. So going back to the point about that there is this belief that in order to be sovereign and sustainable, that's probably going to come at a cost. What is interesting is when you break that down, it's not necessarily the case. And I will use what it is that we bring to the market to prove that point. I mentioned earlier that by cooling at the chip doesn't mean that we need to cool the room, etc. By cooling at the chip and the water cooling that we use, it's in a closed loop, so there is no evaporation. So we also use less water. So far we're less water, we're less power. Also, because of the way we rack our servers and what we can do with our unique cooling also means that we can get more density, we can get more servers into a rack. And then the last point about controlling this life cycle and the way that we build our servers and give them a second and third life. When we break all of that down into one sort of element of context, we've got control over the distribution and of these servers and their ultimate life cycle beyond its first life, and the way that those parts are responsibly moved on or reused, etc. We then, as I mentioned, use less power, and it is significantly less power. We are at a power utilization, which is currently, I hate to quote a number here, but it's currently, I will quote a number and give it some context. We are currently at a number of 1.24, which means nothing unless I give you some context. And there are some governments in the APAC region that are pursuing and asking cloud providers, to chase and get to a figure of 1.3. We are already well below that. And in fact, it keeps going down. A couple of years ago, that was at 1.26. So we are getting more and more efficient. And then the other thing that we do, because it's in a closed loop, we're not using evaporative air conditioning, we also use less water. So, in summary, more control over the distribution of our servers and their whole life cycle, less power, less water, and as I also mentioned, less space because of the density that we achieve, it adds up to less cost. So it means that the conversation that senior leadership team is having in the boardroom about being more sovereign, they can choose a European cloud provider, okay, and they can use the most sovereign or the most sustainable of those choices as well, and in fact can enjoy an incredibly high performance to price ratio. So they end up getting their services, their infrastructure at a far superior price, whilst delivering on those other promises that they made, that they would be more sovereign, that they would be more sustainable. So I think we really are helping out the boardroom and making that choice a little bit easier.
Definitely, Terry. And I think cloud providers, I think they're not just mere tech vendors today. I think they are becoming strategic partners that can influence an enterprise's ESG goals and operational efficiency and, how they can adapt to be future ready. And I think this shift is creating a new benchmark for what enterprises expect from their cloud ecosystem. Building on that thought, Terry, we discussed that how these ESG requirements and sustainability are becoming boardroom a level priority. I think the rapid acceleration of AI is also reshaping how data is used because information or data is no longer just stored, it is continuously processed, analyzed, and redistributed across environments. So the question that usually leaders face and they cannot afford to overlook is, if you don't control the keys, do you really control the data? So how do you think, or how has the conversation around data sovereignty evolved from a mere compliance requirement and now it has become like a very boardroom level priority?
You mentioned there that this data that they're storing, the boardroom needs to be a little bit more conscious about what they are doing with their data. And you also mentioned that this is a partnership with a cloud provider as such. So I think they need to be concerned at two levels: the choice that they make, where is that data stored, and how do we use that data, or how does that customer, that entity, the organisation, how do they use that data? But they also need to challenge and ask the question about how the cloud provider then uses that data as well. The cloud providers are responsible for and store vast amounts of data. And there is an opportunity for organisations, these cloud providers, to monetize that data, to use that, monetize that, and turn that into, yes, it's anonymous data, but it is ultimately being shared. So that just becomes a conscious choice. We have decided that we are going to be a pure cloud provider, and we do not monetize that data. So we have taken the choice not to anonymously or otherwise use that data in any way, shape, or form. So the promise we make to customers is that their data remains their data. But within that, they still need to choose a data provider or a cloud provider that is global at scale. So they do have the opportunity to store their workloads in regions or places that are close to either their customers or close to their own offices, so that they can get to their resources and operate efficiently, both from a sovereignty perspective, but also, if it's nearby, that resolves or makes latency issues, significantly better as well. So, look, from that perspective, it's a very conscious choice about choosing the right partner and ensuring that your data remains your data.
I agree with you, Terry, and I think it is important that the boards and the executive leadership are actively evaluating where data resides, who has access to it, and again, the overall cloud strategies can, eventually impact business continuity. And with AI coming into picture, and there's this cross-border data flows, so it is also becoming very important for business operations as well. So the stakes have arguably never been higher, I believe. So that way, I think what you shared becomes very important in terms of ensuring operational resilience and as well as competitive advantage. Great. With that being said, Terry, earlier we discussed about how responsibly we are using power, energy, and water resources, and it's really important that we are moving towards green data centers and ensuring less harm to the environment. And of course, organizations are also under the pressure to meet those sustainability goals. But how can cloud providers balance this growing demand of AI and compute power and balance that with the need for a sustainable infrastructure growth?
That's certainly the biggest challenge
Right.
facing
Mm.
the industry as a whole. Data and the heavy influence of AI means that consumption has gone accelerated exponentially. So there's an element where that consumption, that traffic, is getting greater and greater and greater. And it puts pressure on every element. That does put pressure on power, water, space. There's articles all the time about the infrastructure and the data centers, new data centers that are being built. There's a massive land grab, and trying to get access to big conversations about getting access to water and power, etc. So that responsibility lies with the cloud providers. People largely the consumer, which is the organisations that are making these decisions. Those consumers are really relying on the cloud provider to innovate and to find more efficient ways to utilise power and more efficient ways to utilise water and that space, etc. That side of things sits with the cloud providers. So it really is a responsibility and pressure on our industry. What the organisations that are looking for cloud providers can do is be armed with the right questions and dive deep into that, etc. Bearing in mind that for having your workloads out in the cloud, if you will, and if that consumption is going up, and that organisation, as many are investing in AI and trying to find ways that AI can help their business, etc. That comes with increased consumption. So they do need to find an organisation that is also going to help them deliver or not charge them exorbitant amounts for that traffic, for what is called ingress, or egress fees, fees that are in and out of those data centres. Because what organisations could find themselves in a situation that they're not just helping contribute to the consumption of power, water, and space, but also if they need to find a provider that is either charging very little, or in our case, in many of our data centres, many of our regions, we don't actually charge ingress and egress fees. So it means that they can actually have a predictable bill that won't jump viciously from one month to the next, because they've found something incredibly important in their business, and they've found a way for AI to help their business, and a different way to engage in that, etc. And and AI is trying to make businesses more efficient, so they do, and they achieve that to just be hit with a cost, somewhere else, and then it becomes a balancing act. So just in summary, I think the responsibility of chasing and reducing those numbers and doing more with what we have sits with a cloud provider, and then the responsibility sits with that boardroom, that CEO, etc., and that team, the CTO, the CIO, all those people involved in making that decision in choosing the right provider, and not just taking that from a wish list ticker box. We had that conversation in the boardroom, but genuinely, when they go out to market, asking their cloud providers to provide these numbers. It is interesting how irregularly we're asked about those numbers by provider. Obviously, once we volunteer them, it becomes a point of interest, but the boardroom needs to take up some of that responsibility as well.
Very well said, Terry. And yes, I think today cloud providers should be seen and increasingly looking at sustainability as a design principle rather than just an afterthought. And whether it's optimizing workloads or improving energy efficiency or integrating renewable energy sources, I think the overall industry is finding new ways to balance performance with environmental responsibility.
Indeed.
So, with that being said, Terry, to wrap up our conversation today, one last question would be: how would you define successful and sustainable cloud strategy for an enterprise over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think they have to do what they say, Priya. Right? You make a promise, you have a discussion in a boardroom, etc., and the consumption is going up, etc. You need to make the right choice. It's always better to make. We often look back, with hindsight, and wish we'd made different choices, etc., and maybe reflect that there are certain elements that had been discussed but weren't necessarily acted upon. Sustainability, sovereignty, the geopolitical situation at the moment. All of those topics are not just happening in the cloud space, they're on the news every day. These discussions are being had all the time. We see it on the news, etc. So it is just genuinely doing what you said you were going to do, and the options to be more responsible are out there because there are organisations, obviously in particular ours, but not just ours, that are innovating, that are finding these solutions and doing this at scale. You mentioned some of those being smarter with those workloads and the way that they're utilised in order to use less power in the way that they do their computing, etc. Part of our innovation, etc., is that as well. But those are things that are written. The other elements require deep innovation. But the good news is that, as I mentioned earlier, that making those right choices, etc., doesn't actually mean that you have to pay a premium. You can do this, be responsible with your data and sovereignty, get the performance, get the security, and also be extremely sustainable and have a way to report on it and meet your fiscal responsibilities as well.
Definitely, Terry. And I think to wrap up our conversation today, by investing in energy efficient systems and smart management practices, green partnership, and responsible hardware use, companies can balance innovation with environmental responsibility. Because when we talk about sustainable infrastructure, it definitely protects the planet while also strengthening business resilience, reputation, and profitability. And enterprises that act today will be better positioned to thrive in tomorrow's digital economy. Thank you so much, Terry, for taking out the time and effort to be on our podcast today and sharing some fantastic insights with our listeners, and overall helping us understand that I think over time the sustainable infrastructure contributes to stronger competitiveness and long-term stability. Thank you so much for your insights. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Priya. I've enjoyed our conversation and also appreciate your insights as well. You put a lot of those very eloquently. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Terry. So, this is for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion around sustainable cloud infrastructure. What are certain things you need to keep in mind, and probably how you can balance your growth and innovation as well as sustainability together. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. Thank you so much.